Nice. Welcome, everybody, to the live stream. This is part 3 of our Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm joined by, firstly, Scrapbook Boxing. Scrapbook, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, yeah. I'm good, Random. How you gentlemen doing today?
Very good, Scrap, thank you. And
Doing
big
great.
shout out to you, Random. Good to be here again.
Oh, it's a pleasure spending some time with you guys celebrating this great history of boxing. And the boxing librarian joining us, Scrapbook Boxing. I'm Random Acoustic Thoughts. Call me Bobby. And we are going to drop, it's roughly 50 guys. I didn't actually count it, but we are on the 3rd installment. Now, so far in our first 2 installments, here's the list. If you need, I'm not going to leave it up very long, folks. If you want to read it through, if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes and don't feel like watching them, just pause the video. I'm not going to leave this up. But this is who we've inducted so far. It's an incredible list of some of the greatest pugilists that have ever lived. And we've got more coming at you today. And I think, Scrap, are you going to kick us off again? Is that the plan?
No problem. No problem.
Awesome. So I have a lot longer. I have hours tonight, so we don't necessarily have to, unless you guys need to, we don't necessarily have to rush the way we did the last show. So you take your sweet time, go through your slides, let's have a discussion.
Yeah, I have about 10 o'clock my time.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So
all good.
Just go right on ahead.
All right, so the first
take it away, Scrapbook.
I have Tommy Ryan. Tommy Ryan, world welterweight, world middleweight champion. Had a record of 82-2 with 68 knockouts. Began his career in 1887. Fought the likes of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Jack Root, Mysterious Billy Smith, just to name a few. A fantastic fighter out of Redwood, New York. He's my first fighter. Billy Papke, British Australian world middleweight champions. Phenomenal record he had. Was in the ring with Stanley Ketchum and many others. Smoking Joe Frazier. Jimmy Ellis, Oscar Bonavena, Muhammad Ali, and George Foreman were just a few names that Joe Frazier had faced. And at a time when boxing was turning its page on the history of the game. Jersey Joe Walcott. Jersey Joe Walcott fought the likes of Joe Louis and Ezra Charles and Rocky Marciano, just to name a few. He was a very, very good fighter. He had good leg movement, good hand movement, and could knock you out with one punch. Old Bones Joe Brown. Phenomenal lightweight he was. Came after a very, very good lightweight that my father knew personally, I should say. And that man knocked out Ike Williams. And once I found that out, I actually shed a tear because reading about Ike Williams, I didn't like the fact that this gentleman knocked out Ike Williams, but Joe Brown knocked this man out. And he did very well. I think he had 12 title defenses. Roberto Duran had broken his record. But Joe Brown was a very, very good fighter. Jimmy Carter was the man I was talking about. You have Tiger Flowers, the first black middleweight champion in boxing history, 1926, when he would defeat Harry Greb. But Tiger Flowers was in the ring with Lee Anderson. He was in the ring with many, many great fighters. He was stopped in 2 rounds by Sam Langford, no problem. But Tiger Flowers belongs in the Hall of Fame. Roberto Duran, great lightweight. Marlon Starling, who was not in the Hall of Fame. I'm waiting to see when he gets in. He's way overdue. Carlos Ortiz and Bob Foster, Coco Kid and Larry Holmes, Sid Smith. You need to look up his record. Les Dorsey, very good Australian middleweight. He was a champion. Cisco Escobar, first Puerto Rican fighter to win a title. You had Little Flash Alorte, great Filipino southpaw. Joe Sandy Sadler, Allentown Joe Gans, and Lynn Johnson. Just quickly, I want to explain about Lynn Johnson and why I selected him. It's because of what he did for the game, to improve the game, to give all fighters opportunities. He was also the British Empire middleweight champion. So I had to select Lynn Johnson. Does anyone have any doubts about the list of great fighters that I just named?
Scrap, who was the Filipino southpaw again?
Little Flash Alorte.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, sorry. See, on my end, on my end, you just broke up a bit, mate. I was just waiting while you finished. I didn't want to interrupt. Yeah,
Oh no,
great
I'm
fight. Was
sorry.
it?
Yeah, Little Flash Latte. Yeah, had a really good fight with Joe Sandy Sadler. Good fighter.
Beat him in a
Yeah, I'm
big
cool with
upset. It
all
was
it.
a big upset when he beat Sadler at first time. Very big upset.
Oh,
Sadler got him
absolutely.
back later, but yeah, big upset.
Yes. Yes. I remember real quickly, I remember when Little Flash Latte fought a fighter by the name of Miguel Barrios. Miguel Barrios had a very good bolo punch, Puerto Rican
Yeah.
fighter. Very, very good fighter.
Yeah, another thing about Gabriel Allard, when you watch him, he's so similar to Pacquiao in his style, how he moves, how he punches. It's
Yes.
uncanny.
Yes. Yes. Great comparison. Great comparison.
Oh, I'm gonna have to
No,
check that out.
I have no issues, Scrap at all, with your list. Sid Smith won out at blue, but yeah, an impressive choice actually, because very few people talk about Sid Smith. Marlon Starling to me, more on what I'd consider on my fringe, but I understand why he's in. Other than that, no, I've no objections to me in one way or another. They're all worthy entries in my book.
Thank you, BL.
Yeah, and I have no issue with anyone. I took a glance at Sid Smith and Starling, and a couple of guys I didn't know as well. Totally cool with all these picks. I respect your nomination. And folks, we run this thing. So this Hall of Fame, we're not talking about famousness. We're all pretty resume based, but there's historical implications for some of these careers.
Yes.
And so certain fighters who may not have as strong, they still have to have a strong resume, but among the strong resumes, not great resumes, some fighters are pivotal in certain ways that push them over the threshold to me, perhaps to my co-hosts here.
Yeah, because I'll just add to that if I may, Random. One other quick point for people to consider. I've always thought as well, boxing industry is so large. There's so many divisions, so many fighters. The divisions have grown over time, and there's so many fighters in each division that, to me, any fighter who can be considered a top 30 fighter in any division, aside from maybe a few fringe divisions like minimum weight, light flyweight, that have only been around 30, 40 years tops, minimum weight even less. If you're really a top 30 fighter in any of those divisions with all the rich history and all the fighters, you're pretty much fairly guaranteed to be considered a Hall of Famer anyway. Because, you can go to middleweight and list probably 60 fighters who could join Hall of Fame. So that's just another fact to consider. It's not always about, as you guys all know, it's not always about just the resume, like Random alluded to. If a guy is one of best flyweights, he deserves to be in the Hall if he's got the resume, and blah blah blah. Because he's one of great flyweight fighters. So, if a great fighter in the division can't be considered for all, then there's a problem.
Yeah, and the division, like most of my research goes into the early era where there are only a handful of divisions. And sometimes divisions would come and go, like light heavyweight showed up in 03. Jack O'Brien won it, but then didn't really pursue it because he wanted to jump up but this was back when light heavyweight was literally guys who were too small for heavyweight to be considered competitive at heavyweight usually, but too big for middleweight. And so it was like that in between ground, that no man's land. But a lot of those guys just wanted to be heavyweights. They were just a little bit too small. So, there's like a context to each era. And to the newer eras, I don't know as well, but I have been trying to look people up as you guys nominate them or as I decide to nominate them. So I'm just want to give that disclaimer that the newer decades, the more recent 50, 60 years is really not my realm other than watching fights, but I don't equate that to understanding careers. I watch almost most of the fights I watch. I was watching Holyfield fights today. Man, I love watching that guy fight, but that's not how I'm rating his career. It's about the opponents, not how exciting and enjoyable the experience is. For me, a Hall of Fame, we're trying to give fame. We're not recognizing fame. We're giving it to people who deserve it because of what they did fighting people and what that meant in their era, what it meant, the fights they had, what they meant in that time. And I'll expand on that when we get to my slide. But yes, Scrap, you can keep on going. Sorry to ramble on.
No, just one point about the Hall of Fame. Some people say, Well, it's called the Hall of Fame, so it's about who's famous. No, it can also mean who was famed, i.e., who is remembered. It's not about who's more popular.
Yeah, true, very true.
But yeah, Scrap, ultimately, you got your listing this week before me. I would have picked a number of those fighters you picked as well. So yeah, it's a good list. It's a good list.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, Andre asked a question. He said, "Would Diagata, the first and only deaf mute world champion, and Alphonse Halimi, the guy that went through fire to beat him, have they a place in your guys' Hall of Fame?" In you guys' Hall of Fame, I don't have an opinion on that, but I'll look into it. Yeah, it depends how deep we go. Because, like, say if we go 300 deep, there are a lot of guys who I would think of before I thought of like circumstances like that. But if we go 400 deep, 500 deep, hey, there are a lot of things I'll be considering.
Who the first name was? Oh, Mario Diagata. Yeah, I know who he means now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really
well,
good
the
question,
only reason
Andre.
I wouldn't answer it, Andre, buddy, is I just won't give anything away when we're doing something like this. So if any of those guys end up on my nominations, that's when I'll out them. But yeah, I won't forward preview anyone just for secrecy,
Yeah, and keep our options open because I'm learning as I'm doing this. Just like when I tried to crack the BL code and predict your updated top 1000 BL and other projects.
Oh, yeah.
These are research projects for me, even though the end product is something else. But for me, it's all about learning the rich history of this sport, which is so vast that I will pass away long before I ever get to everything I want to. I'm picking my battles. I will definitely look into that though, because I do want to. I have considered pivotal things. One of my nominations is largely in there. He has a good resume, but he's largely in there for the pivotal nature of his championship, even though he was never undisputed in my book. We'll get to that though. BL, did you want to? Did you want to just riff on this amazing list of nominees that Scrap put up? I mean, what a great bunch of fighters! Absolutely incredible.
Well, one of the things about is Scrap, as always, with his experience in sport, he's picked a really good diverse selection of fighters across the different eras, and fighters who were great fighters for different reasons. Tommy Ryan was a great fighter, only suffered a few defeats in well over 100 fights. Charles Kid McCoy, etc., etc. And I believe it was Young Corbett the first, the other one who beat him, if I recall correctly, George Green. But yeah, a fighter like that, he doesn't have the greatest resume, but he was one of the defining fighters of his time. Also had that great lean back style and extend his left hand, a bit like Jeffries copied from him. But yeah, he was one of the great fighters of his time, welterweight and middleweight champion, lineal champion for virtually a decade over both divisions. I mean, one of the finest fighters of his time. I do have certain issues with him, not in regards to joining the Hall of Fame. I've no issues there, just certain issues on some of his opponent selection that I'm sure Scrap will agree with me on. But other than that, he's a great fighter. You get other fighters like Joe Frazier. I mean, someone on a live once said that Ron Lyle did 10 times more than what Joe Frazier did, and that Joe Frazier was the Javonte Davis of the 1970s, which is extremely laughable. Once I crawled off the floor after my horrendous belly laughing and my aching stomach muscles. Frazier had a smaller career. He was 32, 4-1. But in that small career, he fought Ali 3 times. He fought George Foreman twice. Like Scrap alluded to, he beat Bonavina. He fought multiple times Jerry Quarry, Jimmy Ellis, Buster Mathis, Joe Bugner. When you look at his career for a short career, he crammed a huge amount of work in. Marlon Starling, to many people, has been a fighter who should have been in Hall years ago. Only certain people know why he's not included. And you look at other lists, Larry Holmes on there, the Eastern Assassin, one of the great heavyweight champions in most people's top 10 heavyweights of all time, which to me, if you're in a top 10 fighters of all time in the division, amongst the 8 main divisions, I mean, you're pretty much guaranteed a Hall of Famer if your career with that good. Yeah, it's a really good selection, actually. And like I said, I really like the inclusion of fighters like Sixto Escobar, Gabriel Flasher Lord, who I rate as the greatest Filipino fighter of all time, just slightly behind Seferino Garcia, great puncher, and of course Manny Pacquiao. So yeah, it's a great list. Great list. I have no objections. Jersey Joe Walcott's another one. You know, he fought Joe Louis in that first fight. You know, he was slipping and countering and making Joe Louis look a mug at times. You know, and he were also giving him a bad run in second fight until Louis caught him and then just pounced on him with that two-fisted salvo punches that just left him on floor. But yeah, a great ring technician, Jersey Joe Walcott. You know, fought who's who, 4 fights with Azad Charles, lost the first 2, won the last 2. You know, of course, the 2 fights were Rocky Marciano and everyone else in between. So yeah, it's just overall a great bunch. Hi guys, you've both come very quiet on your end.
Thought he should see something if it's okay. Oh, I'm sorry, BL. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can now. Yeah, everything just broke up. Yeah, broke up. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking over you. My apologies. Yeah, I was going to say, I was watching back some Jersey Joe fights a couple months ago. You know, he was quite the stylist.
Oh,
like, if you watch
very skilled fighter, yeah.
him and watch the way he would play the Jersey Joe shuffle, you can hear it on you. It's on YouTube. It's one of those fights. They talk about the Jersey Joe shuffle. They talk about the Walcott waltz. They talk about the cakewalk.
And I'll tell you something as well.
Oh, I think Scrap.
To those people out there who still criticize Rocky Marciano for fighting old Jersey Joe Walcott, all I'd say is to everyone, just watch the Walcott Marciano fight one again. If that guy is past his prime and shot, I'm a monkey's uncle. He dropped Rocky, okay, for a start, and he gave Rocky hell in that ring. If that is a guy who's shot and past his prime, I'm a monkey's uncle. So we need to credit Rocky for that win. Yeah,
it's
great
like Lennox
fighter.
Lewis. Yeah, the great Lennox Lewis said that, you know, he kind of bloomed late. Like, he was, I mean, obviously he was always elite, but like he.
Yeah, random buddy, you keep breaking.
He didn't age the same way other guys.
Yeah, random, you keep
Lennox
breaking up.
Yeah, you breaking up, random.
Sorry, guys. I'm going to find a better spot. Go ahead and talk some more.
No problem.
Well, if it's okay, I'll just jump into my list.
Go for
I'll
it,
give you some time, random, to find another location. So everyone, yeah, big shout out to Scrap for those great picks there. Fantastic. Now, on to my picks, okay? Now, my first fighter I'm putting in, okay, is my #1 rated African-born. I say African-born, okay? African-born fighter of all time, the great Nigerian former middleweight, and light heavyweight undisputed champion, Dick Tiger. To me, Dick Tiger fought in the era of Emil Griffith and all these other great fighters. You know, being a 2-time undisputed champion and having the great resume he has, to me, Dick Tiger was a cert to join the Hall of Fame, as was the great southpaw lightweight Lou Tendler, who actually fought below lightweight as well in his career, and also fought at welterweight in his career. Lou Tendler won at great southpaws, and in fact, until Manny Pacquiao came along, to a lot of people, Lou Tendler was the greatest southpaw of all time to many people, and he had a great career himself. The next one is the featherweight puncher Sandy Sadler. Now, I always remember when I read an interview with Willie Pep, and he was asked about the first Sadler fight where he got destroyed in 4 rounds, and someone said, you know, Willie, what happened? Blah, 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 blah. He said, well, I came out, moved, jabbed, fainted. He said, and he just ignored all that, attacked me and beat me up. Fair enough. Nice way of putting it. Peppercorns put on that great display, bedazzling Sadler for the first 11 rounds, pretty much in rematching one of Pep's great wins. The next one is the powerful middleweight champion, Freddie Steele. Freddie Steele only had a small number of defeats in a well over 100-fight career. He was a very powerful middleweight champion. He was hard hitting, but not a Julian Jackson. But he was a hard puncher. He was very strong, very hard to beat in his prime. To me, you know, following on that line from Ketchel, Klaus, O'Dowd, Greb, you know, to me, Freddie Steele was one of the great middleweight fighters following that period of the 1920s. And on to middleweights, okay, my next nomination is the great welterweight and middleweight contender Dave Shade, who actually in the 1920s, actually on my pound for pound ranking, scored pound for pound #1 in one of those years, and he was rated pound for pound for a number of years in the 1920s in my all-time rankings. He fought a who's who, okay? Didn't get the Greb fight, even though that fight was discussed. I also showed someone the other day an article where they were discussing Langford fighting Greb, but that's another topic for another time, where they were trying to make that match, because people say, no, they never tried to make it. No, they did. I showed someone proof the other day. So Dave Shade had a massive career. He won at best welterweight and middleweight contenders of his time. Never got that title, but fought who's who and fought some of the greatest fighters of all time and scored many great wins himself. Now, my next one, okay, minusing Tommy Ryan, that Scrapbook nominated, is former lightweight, light welterweight and welterweight champion Barney Ross. Now, earlier in boxing history, people didn't credit Barney Ross being a three-weight world champion, because when you went back a number of decades, people didn't consider him a three-weight champion due to the light welterweight title going on hiatus and then coming back at a later time. But Barney Ross was a three-weight world champion, you know, former Marine, as tough as they come, you know, fought great fighters, you know, Canzoneri, McLarnin, you know, Henry Armstrong, fought a who's who, had a good title fight record, was a very, very hard fighter to beat, only suffered 4 defeats in over 80 professional fights, and was almost impossible to knock out. So Barney Ross is my next entry. And there's another lightweight going in, okay? I nominated Wesley Ramey. Now, some people may not be as familiar with Wesley Ramey as they are other lightweights from 20s into 30s. You know, fighters from that period like the great Sammy Mandel and Rocky Kansas, you know, Jimmy Goodrich, Stanislaus Lueza, all these, Sid Terris, all these are the fantastic lightweights. Wesley Ramey were one of the best lightweights in the world for virtually a decade. Okay, again, he never got that title, but he has a great resume, as you will see next year when his career video comes. And next up, okay, I nominated Will-O-the-Wisp Willie Pep. Now, to me, I've always argued, and I will always argue, that Willie Pep's resume does not better Tommy Loughran or a Greb or a number of other great fighters you could pick out. Okay, but the one thing is, you know, he was a long-time lineal featherweight champion. He did engage in a 4-fight series, in one of the most brutal fight series of all time, fighting Sandy Sadler, especially fight 3 and 4. He got destroyed in first fight, scored that great upset in the second fight when a lot of people were writing him off, saying he can't come back from that. That was a devastating defeat. And Pep came out, boxed, moved, slipped, slid, weaved, you know, kept out of the way, jabbed, poked, you know, kept Sadler guessing. And by the time Sadler started getting into the fight by round 11, 12, Pep had a massive lead. It was a great win. So, yeah, Willie Pep, and many people rate Willie Pep top 10 fighter of all time. I do not, but I do recognise he was one of the great featherweight fighters of all time. And next up, okay, is the Express, okay, Billy Patrol. A number of Hall of Famers we nominate will not be champions, okay? And Billy Patrol is one of them who qualifies as a Hall of Famer, even though he never got a title. What you're talking about in Billy Patrol, when he was at his best on his best day, you had a formidable target to beat, okay? He was tough, he was resilient, he was a great body puncher, he threw great combinations, he was persistent, and he was a very hard man to beat on his time. Also for, again, many great fighters from his time, you know, whether that's, you know, Tony Canzoneri, etc., etc. In fact, it would a win from Canzoneri over Billy Patrol, where some writers at ringside said on this night, Canzoneri could have lived in the ring with any great lightweight of any era. Up to that point, that's how good Canzoneri was that night. And my next nomination, okay, is the great Puerto Rican fighter. Started out as a light welterweight, undisputed champion, what he eventually lost to Duilio Lloyd, the great Italian fighter. And then he went to lightweight, also captured undisputed titles at lightweight, fighting a great resume himself, you know, from Ishmael Laguna, on and on. He's the great Carlos Ortiz, a fighter who's very high on my greatest Puerto Rican fighters of all time. Next is middleweight southpaw Mike O'Dowd. Again, a bit like a Frank Klaus, a bit like a Freddie Steele, an underrung undersung middleweight champion, a southpaw, a tricky fighter. He kept spearing Greb on those left hands. Greb were having trouble figuring him out. O'Dowd would never give in rematch, which was probably a wise decision, because when Greb got in there knowing what to expect, it'd have probably been a different ball game, especially with Greb coming into his more towards the end of his prime, 1990, 1920, when he was at his physical peak. I don't think O'Dowd would have repeated the first fight, but we'll never know. But he's still got that result on his record. Next up is the feared bantamweight and featherweight puncher, terrible Terry McGovern. Fantastic knockout record, great title record for time. Fought many good or great fighters himself and scored many great wins in there. Although, again, in some scenarios, I'd have some issues with his opposition, as Scott would agree with me from the time. So I've got 7 left, people. Okay, the first of those is the great UK fighter, Owen Moran. Now, Owen Moran, excuse me, I'll just have a drink, I'm talking. Owen Moran was one of Tyson's favourites when he was watching Jacob and Caton's extensive fight film library. Mike Tyson used to love watching Owen Moran. Fast and furious fighter he was. One of the great UK fighters. Again, people, talk about UK Hall of Fame, as they say, Hamed and Hatton and Ben and Calzaghe, and very few mention the great Owen Moran or fighters like Charlie White. So, yeah, I'm adding Owen Moran in there. Next up is the Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta. Jake LaMotta has Greb aside and a few others. He's got one of the toughest resumes of any great middleweight fighters. Not only did he fight Sugar Ray Robinson 6 times, he also fought numerous Black Murderers Row fighters as well, at a time when many didn't want to go near the Black Murderers Row. Take Gus Lesnovich at light heavyweight, for example. Some people said, someone once said to me, how did Lesnovich rate from 1941 to 1948 as linear light heavyweight champion? I didn't think he was that good. I said, and I joked to him and said, well, he reigned that long, sister. He avoided Jimmy Bivins, or he wouldn't have done. But yeah, so, LaMotta, great resume, super tough fighter. And even in his later life, Ancient, he's still corpus mentis, he's still free talking, he's still got his faculties, considering all those tremendously hard fights he had, and heavy punches he took, like off Nardico later in his career, and the beating he took off Robinson in St. Valentine's Day Massacre, fighting Black Murderers Row fighters. Incredible resume. Jake LaMotta underrated. Next up is the great bantamweight champion, Joe Lynch. Again, when we're talking about tough fighters, Joe Lynch is one of the toughest bantamweight fighters of all time. Fighting fight series with Pete Kidderman and fighting all the other fighters he fought, he was a legitimate world bantamweight champion and one of the toughest bantamweight champions of all time. So my final 4, okay. The first is a fighter I always shout out, okay, because he's the first American black light heavyweight champion for the established title. Okay, and that is one John Henry Lewis. Of course, there were other coloured champions, like Anderson, Kid Norfolk, but John Henry Lewis got that. He was the first American to win the world light heavyweight title. Of course, battling Siki French Senegalese earlier. So John Henry Lewis goes in. John Henry Lewis were unbeaten in light heavyweight title fights. The only title fight he lost was to Joe Lewis towards the end of his career. And aside from that, he was unbeaten in light heavyweight title fights and fought a great resume, including fight series against Maxi Rosenblum and many others, scoring wins against Rosenblum. Now, my final 3. The first is a great flyweight fighter. He also fought up to what would now be featherweight, super featherweight. That is one Fidel Labarba, a top 10 flyweight of all time in my all-time rankings. In that top 10 with Jimmy Wilde and Frankie Gennaro and Pancho Villa. Fidel Labarba, fought a fight series early on in the career against Jimmy McLarnin, and fought many great fighters across his time, and is, to me, a worthy Hall of Famer. And next up, we have one of my favourite fighters to watch, because like Tommy Earns and like Sir Bob Foster, these kind of more taller, gangly looking fighters who can generate incredible punch power. Alexis Arguello has one of the finest knockout records in title fights that you can find. All those title fights across 3 divisions, lost twice later to Adam Pryor at light welterweight. But prior to that, he virtually lost no title fights almost across 3 divisions. It is incredible what he did, and knocked out most of them, and fought many, many good fighters from, Ruben Olivares to Alfredo Escalera, to Rolando Navarrete, on and on. Okay, the names go on. And I always say Jim Watt taking him the 15-round distance was an accomplishment. And what a lovely guy Arguello was. Jim Watt said he saw him like 20 years afterwards and he hadn't seen him. And Lex Arguello tapped him on the shoulder and he looked round and he saw it with Alexis, and Alexis just gave him this huge bear hug. That respect that in boxing often you don't get in other sports. And my final entry, of course, is my Leo, Leo Florian Hoku. Laughably, some people don't think should be in a Hall of Fame. But anybody who knows anything about boxing has no problem with Leo being in, from fighting Harry Lewis's and Jack Britton's, to fighting great middleweights, like Mike Gibbons, fighting great light heavyweights like Dylan Levinsky, great middleweight light heavyweights like Harry Greb. Leo Hook, fought and beat fighters like George Chip, Frank Klaus, on and on and on. He has one of the greatest resumes of that period for a non-champion, and Leo Hook is my final entry. So that is my list for this particular edition. What does everyone think? Does anyone have any objections? Or
No, none at all.
Great list, beginning to the very end. Great job, PL. I just want to say one thing. Arguello, who you said, the first fight I ever went to, Alexis Arguello, when he was in Oliveras in 1970, Inglewood, California. And I was at the second row. And
you're breaking up a bit.
It was for the WBC. I think it was the Bantamweight Championship title. My God, it was a featherweight championship title. Am I right, or the bantamweight?
Featherweight title.
The weight. And when he
Scrap, you were breaking up. Can you repeat that whole thing?
Yes. 1974, Inglewood, California. The first bout that I ever went to see live was Alexis Arguello when he fought Ruben Olivares. That was in California. And it was, it was a 13-round knockout for the WBC Featherweight Championship belt. And it was a beautiful back and forth bout. It was the first fight I've ever seen. I was 7.5 years old. And I've never witnessed from this point forward, from that point, and I've seen them all. I've seen the Haglers and Hearns, but that fight was the most exciting to me because Alexis Arguello, he was the determination that he had in that fight. He refused to be denied. To this day, was the most tear-jerking experience that I've ever had. And I've been to some matches, but that was a great match. So Alexis Arguello, when you put him on that list, it really, it was a warm feeling for me because I remember him from the beginning. I saw him when he was in the ring with all the greats. And great fighter was Alexis Arguello. Great fight.
Scrap. That's fantastic. I think, and the way he finished it so calmly, initially tagging him down with those first shots and then finishing it. I always remember the uppercut. What a beautiful uppercut it was that he hit Olivares with. Fantastic fighter, Alexis Arguello. Like I said, he's one of great knockout punchers from lightweight down. His knockout record is incredible. In one division, I think it's 9 title fight wins with 8 knockouts. I mean, it's incredible. But he beat, like you said, a lot of good fighters across that time as well. So my list is covers the main divisions really. I've got flyweight, bantamweight, featherweights, lightweights, middleweights. No heavyweights this time. Interestingly, when I look at my list, some fighters who fought at heavyweight, but no direct heavyweights.
Yeah, I'm very happy with my list. We dropped a bunch of heavyweights last time.
Yes, we did actually, didn't we? Yeah, I recall. Yeah,
this is a great list, and it's a nice sprinkling of different kinds of greatness. Because Shade, man, he stayed ranked, and he was crazy tough career. It's definitely a good shot. Then you have like Willie Pep, who a lot of people are familiar with. O'Dowd, very underrated. McGovern, Terrible Terry, a real knockout man, you know, and at a time like set the sport on fire. One of those guys where they come around, they're stopping everybody, and people are like, oh snap, this is some extra level. Jake LaMotta, like you said, one of the toughest middleweight resumes you'll ever see. It's absolutely sick.
Yeah.
I remember his career video just keeps going. For a more modern guy, like halfway to the modern era guy.
Yeah, Black Murderers Row fighters, Zivic, Robinson 6 times. I mean, he fought whoever, everybody. You know, Marcel Sedan and Danny Nardico. I mean, the names he fought go on and on and on. It's incredible.
Yeah, Leo Hook's resume obviously is just silly. Owen Moran, very, very underrated. Barney Ross, very clean record, very great fighter. And yeah, it's just so much great representation on different levels in this list of yours. It's very impressive. I definitely can't disagree with any of those pick or with scraps. You know,
and may I say, gents, as well, I'll butter us up a bit. I know we're not like that, but I think we've all done a great job so far of picking a lot of great fighters. And as Hall of Fame is already starting to look very, very strong, like I thought it would when 3 of us got together.
Oh, yeah, phenomenal job and phenomenal names. And so many memories for me. And just to choose the men that we've chosen collectively so far, it just shows that we're looking at it from a perspective of what boxing truly was and what we expect out of fighters.
Yeah, well said, Scott. Yeah, well said.
And as a reminder, here's everybody we inducted in across the first 2 shows. Got to a lot of people in 2 shows. We're kind of skimming across as we would just have to not end up doing 1 show on each guy, each competitor. That's just not feasible. And just, you know, FYI, that's Barbados Wolcott and Joe Gans in the graphic there, left to right. And 2 of the all-time greats, 2 of the formative legends of the sports, great stylists. And so they had to be, you know, we keeping it top shelf stuff for the main graphic. There's Jeanette McVeigh and a shot from their 1909 49 round battle in Paris. I'm not even sure where the first one is. Oh yeah, the first one, Sam Langford knocking out Iron Haig the night he was supposed to fight the great Jack Johnson. Johnson withdrew. Langford became the last pre-Lonsdale belt British heavyweight champion. They waited a couple years to sort it out after he smashed that guy so bad.
Yeah, Random, before you go to your list, can I just mention one little point about that fight as well that a lot of people misinterpret? A number of people say to me, well, Iron Haig, he must have been a really good fighter. He nearly knocked Sam Langford out. I'd just like to clarify that Iron Haig did not nearly knock Sam Langford out. Langford took a knee, but even Iron Haig said he knew he was in trouble because when Langford went to one knee, Langford was looking up at him, grinning. Okay, and then Langford got up and proceeded to punch holes in every gap in Iron Haig's defence and just picked him apart. So he didn't nearly knock out Sam Langford. He took a shot, a clean shot. He went to one knee because it caught him unawares. He was smiling at him, looking up. He was fully up. He wasn't hurt at all. He was just grinning at him. And then he got up and proceeded to do a beat down on him, systematically punching through every hole, landing hard shots, and Iron Haig went a few rounds later. So yeah, I just wanted to clean that up because a lot of people say, oh, Langford can't be that great. Iron Haig nearly knocked him out. No, he didn't nearly knock him out at all. He didn't really have him hurt.
Yeah, sometimes for various reasons, the myths and counter myths, they sort of just spread and maintain. They're catchy in some way. Like with Langford, like people would, including his manager, would sort of be like, oh, he almost stopped Johnson. But what happened was Johnson got tired at one point in that fight. And there were different reasons given, but it became a whole thing where Langford...
Yeah, I think it was round 10. I think round 10 was first round where Langford really got to him. Johnson said Langford hit him with a shot and he didn't know where he was, but he kept his instinct kept him going and kept his composure.
Right. So like Langford made an incredible account of himself, seeing as it was only his like 3rd heavyweight fight. He'd fought Joe Jeanette and got stopped in, I believe, Lawrence, Massachusetts, then beat him in the rematch in Chelsea, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. And then a few weeks later, he's fighting Johnson. Like a lot of Langford's fights were, I won't go on a Langford rant, but a lot of his fights were short notice. He fought Joe Gans. It was like a week. He had a week.
Yeah, some of those rounds against Johnson as well, though, he were taking a shellacking.
Oh, he got absolutely smashed. but he
But
survived.
he only weighed 156. Johnson weighed 185. But in some of those rounds, Johnson was beating on him pretty bad. I think it's testament that Langford got through fight, but also in some two at later rounds, what it 10 and 13 or 10 and 12, really hurt Johnson with solid shots, and he went through the distance even as a middleweight. So yeah,
I mean, he could crack when he was much lighter. So it's not necessarily a surprise that Johnson was looking at other equally or close to as viable financial paydays fighting other guys. Because once Langford put on more pounds, Johnson's extrapolating out like, okay, he was a really tough test at this weight. Now you add 15 pounds to that guy. This is not good.
Well, you know what? Can I say something real quickly with that bout that took place in 06? A lot of people don't know. 2 weeks before Sam Langford faced Jack Johnson, he faced Joe Jeanette, and he fractured his hand in that Joe Jeanette bout. And Jack Johnson knew that. That's the reason why he didn't want to give him a second shot, because Sam Langford wasn't fully healed. Now, he was 20 pounds less weight than Jack Johnson at that time. He was about 20 years old, but at the time, he couldn't really unload that right hand like he wanted to, and he ranged him in that bout. A lot of people don't know that, so that's one of the reasons why Jack Johnson never gave him a second shot.
Yeah, and that's it. I'm jumping straight on that because that's another great point that Scraps mentioned about that fight. Not only about the injury, but about the fact that we have to remember Langford was like 20 years old. He was a kid fighting a guy who'd been undefeated. Well, who was undefeated coloured heavyweight champion. You know, so even though Langford had a number of fights, he wasn't even fully developed yet.
It's true. I think also, his schedule was catching up to him because he'd had a busy 03, 04, and a busy 05. And then
took
in
fights
06,
with Jeanette,
he got stopped by young Peter Jackson after that.
Yeah.
It took some months off. So I think it was a crescendo of sorts, but like he was aiming high because the first time when he fought Joe Jeanette, I think it was Christmas Day, 1905. That was tough for him. He was giving up 20 or more pounds to Jeanette, and he got beat up. But he was making a jump that no sane person would make. The classes exist for a reason, even back then when there were less classes. Making the jump up. A lot of guys are elite, and then they go up and they're like good, but they it's difficult at the highest levels with the guys who are just a little bit naturally bigger. So happened to Terry McGovern, it happened to a lot of guys. If you give up some size, you can be the best at a weight, and you give up some natural size to a guy who's just as fast or just bigger. It's tough, man. But Langford it was a weird one, a weird career, weirdly viable above his weight. But I won't go into a Langford rank because I want to pull up my list here, and I'm gonna ask you guys to speak a little bit on some of these guys too. So
yeah, your list, buddy. Go ahead. We're eager.
Lennox the Lion Lewis. To some people, the last great heavyweight. There's lots of elite heavyweights, but greatness, you want to go back in the modern era to like the last like great guy. A lot of people would pick him. I might be in that camp. Got to put him in there. I mean, I'm not going to go deep into anybody, but I mean, talking about like, okay, Reddick, Bruno, Morrison, Mercer, Galata, Briggs, Holyfield, Tua, Botha, Rockman, Tyson, Klitschko. I mean, he's got a pretty good resume, to put it mildly. So he had to go in, and I think that's unanimous. Then I put Tommy Burns, Canadian-born Noah Brusso, a.k.a. Tommy Burns. The first sort of traveling heavyweight champion. He didn't just fight in America. He took it on the road, went fought in, other countries and went beat their national champs. And so really, to me, he's a pivotal figure. And he also agreed to unify, once Hugh McIntosh, the Australian promoter, met his price to fight Johnson, which was the equivalent of 30,000 US at the time, which was a record for a guarantee. Win, lose, or draw. Once he met the price, he fought Jack Johnson. They unified the belts. He did lose that fight, but but it's important that he even had it because the other guys, they drew the color line. Going on, Sullivan, Corbett, Fitz drew it on Bob Armstrong, even though he was in his camp, and he agreed to put another fighter up against one of his guys up against Armstrong and back it with money, but he wouldn't fight him for the title. Everyone was drawing the line. Marvin Hart drew the line. Tommy Burns did not draw the line. He almost fought Sam McVeigh in Paris, but the promoter wouldn't meet McVeigh's price. They met Burns, but then didn't have enough left over for McVeigh. Didn't happen. He was going to fight Sam Langford 3 different occasions. California and Philly and in London. The London one nearly happened, but he got injured, and that kind of cut the top part of his career off. So Burns really only fought 1902 to 1908 busy, and then he fought until 1920, but barely. So I put him in. I think he's worthy. He's 47, 4-8, with I think 35 KOs. Yeah, 35 KOs. And an underrated fighter because he's overshadowed by the legends of like Jeffries and Johnson and Langford and the other guys who soaking up whatever attention's on that era. I put him in. Then I got Joe Choinski. Joe Choinski fought a crazy amount of fighters, and he stopped a lot of good fighters. Stopped the original George Godfrey, stopped CAC Smith in 4. He gave Tommy West an early career stoppage in 3. Let's see, who else did he knock out? Frank Childs. He drew with Jeffries over 20. Let's see, who else did he stop? He had trouble with Kid McCoy.
Johnson.
Say again?
Stop Jack Johnson.
Stop Johnson in 3, that's right. Drew with Marvin Hart. He lost to Joe Walcott, Barbados Walcott, who made it in our initial episode. He got TKO'd in 7 with a body shot and I think left hook follow-up. But he lost 1 and then won again and stopped the Irish Giant, Mayer or Mar. So Choinski has a pretty deep career. I think he's respectable. He was too small to be as dangerous as his skill would normally allow in the larger man as far as like fighting at heavyweight, but he was incredible. And he taught a lot to like Jack Johnson. Do you want to add something to that, Scrap, before I move on?
Well, no, just the fact that you have another man in there that he actually faced was Jim Corbett a few times, but he was a man who he wanted to wear gloves at the time when they were bare knuckle. And, Choinski was a very good boxer. He taught Jack Johnson a couple of foot movement while he was in jail. Has a very good story behind Choinski.
He was also one of the trainers for Jeffries in his big comeback mega fight against Jack Johnson in 1910.
Yes, he was.
Jim Corbett went into training just to be in shape enough to train Jeffries. So the old school guys were cheering against Johnson, they wanted the white guys to have the title.
Yep.
And Choinski came in and trained him, and it was but he was a brilliant stylist, so he definitely had to go in. He's one of the top competitors, the spirit of competition for the early era. And as you can see, sorry, go ahead, Bia.
No, I think another thing, and I think a thing that I've often highlighted, and Scrap does on his videos as well, when he's talking about going through opponents' resumes and who the fought is. As you two guys all know, looking at these older careers, there's a lot of other good or dangerous fighters. He fought and beat 2 dangerous punchers. One was Nick Burley, the Australian puncher. He fought from pretty much anybody from middleweight to heavyweight. He also beat good early contenders like Denver Ed Smith. He beat Mexican Pete Everett, who were a dangerous puncher. He fought Joe Goddard and beat him. So, it's not only the Mars. He fought Tom Sharkey. He fought everybody. Scored many great wins. Lost later on in his career, if I recall, twice to Jack O'Brien. Was it twice or 3 times? I think it was twice. So, he's definitely got a great resume, Choinski, and deserves to be in for me.
An important stylist, an important figure in the early era as well. If there are any bonus points beyond strict resume, he definitely qualifies as an important boxer of that early era. That just bolsters the argument for him. And next to him, Jim Jeffries. Jeff. He was so famous they made his last name into a first name, and a lot of newspapers just referred to him as that. And this was the time of acclaim. He was widely acclaimed as the champion heavyweight, even though there was a colored champion during his reign and he drew the line. There were a succession of colored champions. Oh, one thing on Choinski also, willingness to fight the colored champions, CAC Smith, George Godfrey, Frank Childs, Jack Johnson, which is a distinction to be drawn between him and, say, Jeffries, who has a great resume for a short career. Well, a great resume, period, but in a very, very short career relative to his contemporaries, and but did draw the color line at times. So, but Jeffries, he has a packed resume, and he has to go in. He was an important figure. He was the big guy of the time, and the big guy who could fight, but he was crafty, and he was hard to he was hard to land on with telling effect because of sort of his crouching style. Great fighter, and I'm pretty sure didn't he learn a lot of what he knew from Tommy Ryan? I'm remembering that correctly?
Yeah, he kind of partially adopted Tommy Ryan's style of leaning back, extending the left hand to better judge range, and to use the left hand to try and offset his opponent. Yeah, Tommy Ryan were a master at using that style. Tommy Ryan could fight a number of different ways, but yeah, Jim Jeffries, a lot of times you'll see him in the pictures. He bends his back leg quite deep and leans back and extends his left hand. It's just mainly for timing and to give him opportunity to counter whatever his opponent's doing. But yeah, that was something he learned from Tommy Ryan, partially. Yeah,
Fascinating. And then I've got Jack Dillon next to him, to his right, the Giant Slayer.
Oh no, you beat me to Dillon.
Yeah, I did. One of us was going to do it this time. It was me. Jack Dillon. Just go ahead, BL. You do the Jack Dillon.
Yeah, Jack Dillon. He fought a great fight series. Okay, he won 10 fights from 12 against former lineal middleweight champion George Chip, who gave Greb some tough early fights. He also had a 10-fight series, okay, with great light heavyweight Battle and Levinsky. But Jack Dillon, he had nearly 60 pound-for-pound fights, okay, against fighters who were rated pound-for-pound. Nearly 60. He had over 50 fights against pound-for-pounders, okay, not many less than what Harry Greb fought, although Greb fought a more diverse group of great fighters. But, to me, Jack Dillon, you can say we're lineal champion from 14 to 16, replaced by Levinsky, who were lineal champion from then up until 1920. But with Dillon, when you beat fighters like George Chip, and Mike Twin Sullivan and Bob Mohart and Levinsky and Frank Klaus and Al McCoy, okay, and Leo Florian Hook, okay, and Billy Misk and Eddie McGaughty and Jimmy Gardner and on and on. To me, Jack Dillon is one of the greatest light heavyweight fighters of all time.
It just goes on. Fireman Flynn, K.O. Brennan, Hugo Kelly, Gunboat. He fought so many dudes. It's silly. A long series with Jimmy Gardner. They fought a bunch of times across their careers.
Other tough contenders like Paddy Lavin as well, Hugo Kelly, Jack Twin Sullivan. I mean, he fought everybody.
Fought Mike Twin as well. It's just a silly resume. And I'm pretty sure
he had Krause, if I recall. Beat Buck Krause, right. I think.
Yeah, didn't he have about 240 fights, give or take? I mean, he had a gigantic career schedule. Incredible.
Yeah, he had a huge
254. I wrote it down. 254 bouts.
Yeah.
How about that?
Incredible,
We think of someone like Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., he had a lot of fights, but he had less. I'm pretty sure he had less than half of that. So we're talking about some crazy, even if some of the opponents are weaker, just the amount of skulls that those fists have hit, it's incredible. Dillon's very, very underrated.
And from his 31 defeats, nearly half of those he lost in his last 25 fights.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, he kept fighting after he fell off, but that's
it shows that during his prime he lost very little really for fight total. In over 200 fights, he only suffered 15 to 18 defeats. It's considering his opposition, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is. And now on to another short career. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Gentleman Jim Corbett, who was very skilled, but he also had the benefit of the press behind him at a time of sort of racial disharmony, a little distortion there in the lack of harmoniousness in the racial dynamic in the U.S. And he wasn't really an active champ, but he was an important fighter, and he did fight some serious people. And he was sort of one of the pivotal figures. And I thought it was only right that he gets inducted, although he wasn't in the first 20 or 30 guys I thought of. But now we're in this show, I did think of him, and there he is. So he's in, but he was horribly racist. He wasn't a gentleman, and he was one of the driving forces of sort of like the white hope. Forget all the other black fighters, just focus on beating Johnson and drawing a color line forever after that. And this whole thing. So I'm not a big fan of his, but he was an important figure, and his resume was pretty strong, just not as a champion. He was just touring the Southland, doing theater appearances, and then not fighting black fighters because it would tick off his theater goers in the South. But anyway, enough on him. That's enough. That's as much time as he gets. But he is worthy, but with an asterisk or three. Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao had to go in. I got to him first. This guy fought up some weights, great style, inspiring figure on multiple levels. I'll let one of you guys go in on him, or both of you. You want to talk a little Pac-Man, guys?
Yeah, I'll jump in on Pacquiao. Pacquiao started pretty much fighting as a minimum weight. Used to go to weigh-ins with like sand or rocks in his bottoms so he could make the weight. He got his first title against Chachai Sasakul. He'd earlier beaten a fairly tough top 10 flyweight called Chokchai Chok Vivat. Beat Sasakul, who was a very good flyweight champion. Made one defense against Mira, had a non-title fight, lost to Medgoan Singh Sarat, who was quite a dangerous fighter. Not a great fighter, but quite a dangerous fighter down there. From there, he came back at, super bantamweight, beat Lelo Ledwaba. Yes, there are fighters around there who he didn't fight, like dangerous puncher Tim Austin and Paulie Ayala. But he beat Lelo Ledwaba, who was one of the top super bantamweights in the world at the time. And from there, from the super bantamweight fights into the featherweight, super featherweight fights, with those great fight series where Marquez starting the first battle, one of the great fights I've seen. Marquez down 3 times in first round, comes back, what a scintillating battle. The wins over Barrera, when he got the lineal title of Barrera at featherweight, I mean, that was a shock to many people. Many people were thinking Barrera were going to beat him. Pacquiao put on a masterclass, stopping him. He beat him on points second round, but Barrera were more controlled, more cautious, seemed more interested in surviving. Into great Morales trilogy, following on from that, we're beating fighters like Oscar Larios and all these other fighters, Diaz and Hatton. To me, Pacquiao's career is the greatest career at modern era, just slightly ahead of Holyfield. Floyd, to me, was a great fighter, but for a different reason to Pacquiao. Floyd's was consistency, his professionalism, his accomplishments, and his resume, which is better than people say it is. I'm not Floyd's biggest fan, but credit where credit's due. People call Gervonta Davis a Hall of Famer now, and he has done nothing compared to Floyd whatsoever. So ultimately, Pacquiao went on. Now, all of those things added in, even the later trilogy with Bradley, the shock Marquez knockout loss, what was absolutely brutal. He then remodified himself and came back again, to capture lineal welterweight title in the Bradley fight. Were named lineal welterweight champion because Floyd had retired. Him and Bradley were 1 and 2. So Pacquiao got lineal title. And, even from, he went on to become 4-time welterweight champion. I believe he's the oldest welterweight champion to capture a title. And he caught a number of titles. He caught WBA regular. He got the WBA super, and even fighting older against Broner and Thurman, losing to Ugas. Just an incredible fighter. He's rated for virtually a quarter of a century. To people out there, just think about that. Rated as a top 10 fighter for virtually a quarter of a century. Across all those divisions.
Incredible.
That is incredible. He captured 10 world titles. He's got one of the highest tallies. He has well over 30 fights against champions, which even in this time is a lot. Roy Jones, Floyd, De La Hoya, none of them matches Pacquiao's tally on that. He fought. His Hall of Fame numbers have shot up. From the initial Hall of Famers he beat, as more Hall of Famers get added, his Hall of Fame record is growing year on year. To me, he's the greatest fighter at modern era, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. A, for the accomplishments, B, the resume, C, the excitement, the great battles, the great performances. He went in with Hatton, and a lot of people thought it were going to be a tough battle, and he blitzed Hatton. He destroyed him. He blew him away in a show of force.
One of my guys, he schooled him.
The performances against Cotto, I mean, just incredible fighter, Pacquiao. That's my take on him anyway, buddy, for now.
Yeah, my favorite, separate from a resume analysis, my favorite modern fighter is Calzaghe and Hatton. So the Pacquiao school and Hatton hurt. But it is what it is. It's a sport, And Pacquiao, man, his greatness is hard to overstate. And I'd agree. In my book, he's like the greatest of the modern fighters. Depending on where we draw the modern line, there's different ways to look at it. But yeah, what an incredible fighter. Had to go in. I'm glad that I got to put him in. Then we've got the second George Godfrey, the Leaperville Shadow. I think he was from Alabama, but moved out to Pennsylvania, Leaperville, Pennsylvania. He was like screwed by the color line, one of the most screwed by the color line. Great fighter, top handful of heavyweights in the world for a long time. Should have gotten a shot, just couldn't get it. But he was also a celebrity fighter. He was like very entertaining here and abroad, and I feel like he deserves to be in. And if you guys have no objections, I'd like to nominate him to be in. That's cool with you guys?
I'd just like to quickly add, buddy, I don't mean to interrupt, but yeah, just fans out there, listeners, Gene Tunney wasn't keen on fighting him. I think that says a lot.
Oh, yeah. Mobile, Alabama. Yeah, he lost his title. Yeah, go ahead, Random.
Yeah, well, I was saying we inducted Gene Tunney in spite of him drawing the color line and not. Well, anyway, I won't go in on Gene Tunney, but he got in. But definitely George Godfrey, huge fella, and a dangerous heavyweight who didn't get all the opportunities he should have. But what he did do was very impressive, and his status deems him worthy as one of the great heavyweights of that era, of his era. Then I've got Bobby Dobbs, bottom row on the left there. Bobby Dobbs. We don't even know how many hundreds of fights he had. That's how many fights he had. He was just a fighter through and through. He also, so just fun fact, he tried to popularize horseback boxing in Germany to German nobles. There's a photo. If you look online, you can find a photo of him on a horse throwing a friendly punch at somebody. Like, I don't think it caught on. It obviously didn't catch on, but that's a real thing that actually happened. He was trying to teach German nobles, to have their pastime be horseback boxing, which actually sounds awesome. I would watch that. Yeah, but Bobby Dobbs, one of the best lightweights in the world for a long time, and a really, really experienced. Hard to say how experienced he was, but we know the man had a ton of fights. Very important figure at that time. And Scrap, do you want to touch on Bobby Dobbs a little bit?
Yeah, he was a colored lightweight champion. Bobby Dobbs was in there with them all. He actually challenged Joe Gans for his colored lightweight championship title. Was in the ring with him 3 times. And there was a guy by the name of Steve Crosby. You see, Bobby Dobbs is very underrated in terms of all the things that he has done, even outside of boxing. But he was a phenomenal lightweight. Came at that time, like I mentioned, with Joe Gans and many, many, many others. But he held the colored lightweight championship title. He's one of 13 men to do so. Phenomenal fighter was Bobby Dobbs. And I'm glad you put him in there.
Yeah, he had to go in. And he fought in a time where there are a lot of underrated fighters whose full schedule isn't known and for one reason or another just aren't remembered as fondly, even though it was a very rich era with some very busy schedules. So
could I just throw in random very quickly? Scrap. Great shout out there, by the way, for Steve Crosby. Very, very capable, tough lightweight contender. Yeah, very good fighter he was.
Oh, definitely.
Very much. If I'm not mistaken, I found it it was pretty grizzled. It was pretty broken up. Picture of Steve Crosby in the newspaper and send it to BoxRec. So he's got a photo now in BoxRec.
Oh,
if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's a full length picture of him, but it's super, super cracked up. It's not a high quality, but it is a photo of him, and I'm pretty sure that was Steve Crosby. So go check that out on BoxRec, folks.
You sent that in?
Yeah, I found it in the archive. Sent it to Henry.
Oh, great job.
I mean, Harry Haskell, Mr. Haskell, and he put it out there. I'm pretty sure it was Steve Crosby. Yeah, because these guys, some of them don't have faces. That's one of my little hobbies is finding faces, putting faces to these guys, especially on BoxRec, where a lot of people go to browse records.
Could I just do a shameless plug for Henry as well? Just to let all listeners know, Henry's currently just finalising the New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame editions. I believe it's tomorrow. So to anyone in America who's interested in knowing who joins New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame, I do believe Henry said that was the 14th of November tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, when inductions are being done.
Oh, that's wonderful information. Thanks, Pierre.
Great old friend, Henry. Yeah, he was a great president of the New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame. Yeah, great guy, great guy.
Yeah, and he's given me immeasurable pleasure just like letting me sort of feed photos of certain boxers to him that he then puts up, because I don't have any control over BoxRec, but just to know that I'm able to. He's helping me give a face to some of these competitors. It's just good, you know. So I'm very grateful to him. Beyond all the other things he does, wonderful things he does in boxing. I was just on a personal level. So next to Bobby Dobbs, I got George Carpentier, great fighter, great European fighter, and I feel worthy to go in. I feel like he should be honored.
Yeah, I agree.
And he fought a lot of dudes. He was a very, very important fighter in his time, prominent figure. So I did want to put him in. Then
went from flyweight to heavy as well.
Yeah, incredible weight traveler. Good point, BL. Then next to him, I got Frank Klaus, and very underrated fighter, very good resume, very pretty clean record for considering who all he fought. He was acclaimed as middleweight champion following the death of Stanley Catchall, although I think it took a couple years for it to sort out. He was certainly acclaimed. I think it was 1913, one of the European unions, boxing unions, recognized him as middleweight champ, and then recognized Sam Langford as the light heavyweight champ. So it might have been sorted out in part because Langford outgrew middleweight, but he was acclaimed as middleweight champion. It gets a little tricky. It depends who's saying what back in the day before they had like commissions.
Can I just throw one interesting point in on Frank Klaus to listeners as well? We've mentioned a number of fighters tonight. Actually, Frank Klaus beat Billy Papke, who was scrap nominated. He beat Jack Dillon, who random. Damn, he beat me to it. Dillon, one of my favourites. But he also beat fighters like Harry Lewis and Stanley Ketchell. Okay, Jimmy Gardner, Leo Hook, Willie Lewis. So yeah, Frank Klaus, really underrated fighter.
Yeah. He beat Ketchell the fight a month before Sam Langford got a little bit the best of Ketchell in their fight in Philly. He beat him first. And Ketchell was the hot stuff, so it was an important win. It actually caused some people to doubt Ketchell's, okay, so is he still the middleweight champion if he loses a newspaper decision? But anyway, so yeah, I thought Klaus had to go in. Next him, the body snatcher, Mike McCallum. One of the great modern fighters, somewhat avoided at times by certain people, but a great fighter, fought great fighters, traveled weights, great technician, had to go in. Then Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., great fighter, had a monumental start to his career, but also fought a lot of dudes in there, in and amongst some of the other stuff that people would call filler. But, some of these other guys, Jack Dillon, if you look at his fights, like BL said, tons of high-level fights. But he also had a bunch of other fights, guys who weren't on his level, who he just beat up. Well, Chavez sometimes he did that, but it's also a business, and you're making money, and people want to come see you perform. So some of these guys have more fight in them than there are elite fighters they can get at the moment. And they fill it up. And Dillon and Chavez and other guys, did that. Then there's Oscar De La Hoya. Not as many fights. It's like the other end of the spectrum, but he fought some dudes. He traveled some weights. He was one of the greats of his generation. I wanted to induct him or nominate him. Then little Georgie Dixon, little chocolate. He's buried about 2 miles from here. I'm not sure. I moved, so I'm not sure exactly. But George Dixon died broke, but he was a hugely pivotal figure in boxing. It's really hard to overstate how important he is to the history of boxing. So an elite at more than one weight, and just a great fighter that people would refer to long after he was done with the game, still referred to as one of those formative greats of the craft. Truly, maybe someday we should do a show on George Dixon. But anyway, Little Chocolate had to go in, absolutely. Then Miguel Cotto. I haven't nominated as many modern guys, but I wanted to put him in. The resume is there in the context of his times. He's one of the very, very best of his generation, and a great fighter, and definitely deserves to be in there. So that's my list. In short, you guys, if you want to touch on any of those, please do.
Yeah, you know what, Random? I just want to say great job, number one. But number two, with the modern gentlemen that you have in there, you have Pacquiao, you have Cotto, and you also have De La Hoya. Now, all three of them men fought each other. And this is when you look at what boxing should be in the era of the fighters that you're referring to, this is what you want to see. This is what makes them great, and this is what makes them Hall of Fame worthy. So those three men definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. And VL, you had mentioned Pacquiao earlier. Pacquiao did go through generations of fighters, ended up with Shane Mosley and others. So you have to definitely look at fighters like that. Great job and great pick of those men.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scrap. Because to listeners out there, we have to remember that, Cotto, De La Hoya, Pacquiao, Lennox Lewis, these were some of the best fighters in boxing, some of more highly ranked pound-for-pound fighters in boxing, along with Floyd Mayweather and some other fighters from their era. Like with De La Hoya, for example, I've always long argued, the guy had 29, to people out there, sorry, I just needed to cough. To people out there, just consider 45 professional fights, 45, 29 of them were world title fights. He had way more world title fights than he had non-title fights. He was a 4-weight champion by his early 20 fight total, ended 39-6, for his career. Lost to Trinidad. To me, kind of threw Trinidad fight away over the last few rounds. Were beaten by Floyd Mayweather, but scored many other great victories as well. Early victories in his career against Julio Cesar Chavez twice. Fighting Shane Mosley, all the other fighters he fought. De La Hoya is one of the modern greats. Up there, just below fighters to me like Pacquiao, Holyfield, etc. 6-weight world champion. A lot of people say Pacquiao's an 8-weight world champion. I always tell people Pacquiao only won world titles in 6 weights, not 8.
Correct.
2 of the other weights, light welterweight, okay, and featherweight. He didn't capture a world title. He was only thought of as lineal champion, but that is not an official world title. That is like a designation. So Pacquiao is a 6-weight boxing champion. De La Hoya matched that, which is incredible, really. He failed against Hopkins, but, fighting other fighters he fought, being a unified light middleweight champion for a fighter who got his first title at super featherweight, fighting Bradal, Jorge Paez, all those guys he fought down there. Just an incredible fighter, De La Hoya. But the modern fighters randoms added are all in there, like Scrap said, for good reason. They're some of the best fighters of modern era.
Yeah, I feel like it's important for us to, like, the way we're honoring these different competitors, to honor them equally for their own unique contributions to the sport. Because you have some of these guys, like, titles, they got titles coming out of their ears, and other guys like George Godfrey, the second George Godfrey, Leapville Shadow, was denied certain title access. So it's going to look different. Or even like Jeffries, you look at how many champions he fought, or Hall of Famers and things, but there were people he wouldn't fight because he was drawing the color line. He still had a great resume, but like some of these guys, they don't have the perfect career. None of these fighters probably have in detail, but like they're all worthy of honor. Some of them with the shorter careers, but they're very strong and very deep. Or other ones like Tommy Burns, where he was important for multiple reasons. So I thought they all deserve that honor in their own different
Try
way.
this little fact out. A lot of people don't realize this about Tommy Burns, and me, I've never been too big on Tommy Burns. But one little fact about him that a lot of people don't realize, not when you don't factor, like many people don't, the coloured heavyweight titles, even though I fully factor them, and the press and media at that time fully factored them. They announced fights as he will fight so-and-so for the coloured heavyweight championship. So the press accepted them as coloured titles back then. Whether people do now, that's up to them. I don't care. The people in their time did. But Tommy Burns, with his title defences of 11, he actually was the longest reigning champion for the established title in terms of title defences up until Joe Louis. He made more defences than Jeffries. He made more defences for the world heavyweight title, not counting the coloured, than Jack Johnson did. And he made more title defences than Jack Dempsey did. I'm not saying he has a better career. I'm not saying he beat better names. But that's just one little fact about Tommy Burns. He was the longest reigning heavyweight champion in title defences at 11. until Joe Louis. It took Joe Louis to finally beat him some 20 odd years later.
That Burns, like sort of the heavyweight golden age, sort of like Burns, his championship was like just as that was about to happen, where he had Langford, Jeanette, Johnson in his prime, McVeigh, and a lot of powerful heavyweights. So like, Burns went around the world and he went and fought the national champs and things. So like he went and did what he could do in the time he was in, and he was willing to cross the color line. It was like he had a money line, not a color line. He wanted guarantees. He made like 200 grand off of boxing in that short reign as champion with all those fights going around the world. But he wasn't always written off glowingly in the American press because, one, most of them knew he was Canadian, even though he was fighting out of Detroit or based in Detroit. And two, he didn't draw the color line, so they hated that. So Corbett, who was all big mouth in the press, he wasn't, I'm pretty sure he called him a pygmy at one point in an article. Burns, like they were pretty dismissive of him. So he isn't necessarily remembered the way he was seen at the time when he was going around the world fighting these guys and living like a king, hanging out with royals and stuff. So like I have a lot of respect for him. He took it around the world, which now we're like, yeah, of course you go around the world. But yeah, if you got to go on a ship, that's different. That's a different kind of commitment than I'm going to take a 5-hour flight. You can jump on a ship for a couple of weeks, have fun with that. So anyway, yeah, shout out to Tommy Burns. Shout out to all these guys. Do you want to circle back, gentlemen? I took so long to do my slide. Let's go back.
Yeah, could I just, before we jump back, could I just say to my buddy Rasclot, by the way, to everyone who's a great guy, Rasclot's followed me on YouTube for 10 years. Yeah, I'm nearing my 10-year anniversary next month. Yeah, great guy. He asked about Bushy Graham, bantamweight. Yeah, Rascal, I'll just answer your question. Yeah, Bushy Graham, were a great fighter. He's a great bantamweight fighter, a great defensive fighter. A lot of people don't realise Bushy Graham were a fantastic defensive fighter down at bantamweight, and yeah, he mixed in really good company, and I totally agree with you. Anyway, sorry, I saw Random's question, Rascal's question. My apologies.
Yeah, I appreciate all you guys in the chat. When I'll rewatch this at some point, then I'll read everything that everyone's saying. Right now I'm just focusing on not getting names wrong. I'm not very good with names, which is probably not very advantageous, when seeing as this is a whole history of like thousands of names, but it is what it is. They stand out. I do remember the faces. I can probably recognize, I don't know how many hundreds of, but a lot of boxers now just by their photo, which is good. Going back. Like it's easier with the newer guys, but some of these old guys, they're not necessarily well-known faces. But if you see them enough in the archives, you guys know this, you see them enough, they start to stand out. You'd be like, oh, okay. There's Battling Nelson.
Yeah,
I know
like,
that forehead anywhere.
It's like Jim Corbett. To me, Jim Corbett deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for his impact on sport. I have certain issues with him, though. Not with him being in the Hall of Fame, but issues with his career. To me, his career were too small. He spent too much time fighting exhibitions. I know he was an early boxing pioneer, an early boxing, what you'd call a boxing master from his time. He was a very skilled fighter, spent a lot of time fighting exhibitions, maybe too much fighting exhibitions and not having professional fights. And he has a very low professional fight number. Also, I remember reading about his negotiations with Sullivan. Yeah, very interesting stories there that I could get into that. That'll take ages. But many fighters will join the Hall for different reasons. I think too many boxing fans out there sometimes say, well, what gets one guy in has to get the next guy in, and that's not true, because they fight in different eras, they have different career types, they fight different levels of opposition. Some have historical acclaim where others don't, others will have a better resume whereas they don't. So yeah, I think it's a great list, Random. And just to echo Scrap's point, you've done a fantastic job so far, so give yourself a pat on the back. You've done really, really well.
I'm just so grateful that I get to do this with you guys, because I'm learning here. I'm learning constantly. And I'm also like, it's driving my will to learn more, to like dive deeper, because I get like pretty zeroed in on back on like roughly 1902 to like 1910 is really probably like where I spend most of my time. So this is wonderful because there's such a rich history and it's so tempting to just dive in. But I usually just watch fights when I'm not researching, or sometimes while, and that's where I get my other fix for the more modern stuff instead of like reading up on them. And because like Pacquiao, watching someone like Pacquiao or Duran, watching as many fights you can, like in order, and you see just the announcers get more and more impressed by the greatness that they're achieving in their era. Pacquiao especially, so they're going crazy. But a lot of these guys, but you can't take a De La Hoya type resume and then try and make a direct comparison with someone else like a Bobby Dobbs. But they're great in their own ways, and I feel like
One
all of
interesting
our
point,
lists
say
look
on
like
De La
that.
Hoya or Pacquiao, because some people question whether De La Hoya should be a Hall of Famer. All I'd say is let's wait how many decades until a modern fighter in this time builds a better resume than him. We'll be waiting a long time.
Yeah, it's also is there enough talent at a collection of weights or enough big stars to support a climb like that?
I think so,
career.
but it's down to the will to make the fights. I think that's the problem.
Yeah. I'm just gonna, for no reason at all, I'm gonna throw up a photo of Sam Langford, who had his car shipped to him in Australia when he was there fighting. There he is. Even though he died broken blind, he lived it up while he was traveling the world fighting. So Langford's an interesting character. He doesn't have a happy ending necessarily, but the story is a wild ride. First, I'd throw that up, seeing as the three of us all pretty much consider Langford the greatest of them all. But he was denied opportunity. But in spite of that, perhaps this is a good point to make. In spite of that, he created opportunity by giving up weight, by traveling around the world, by taking the short end of the purse. Not always, because some of them were just plain insulting. Like when a promoter offered 25
first of all,
grand.
I'd like to say,
Yep.
Oh, sorry. First of all, I'd like to say, sorry, Andre. Forgive me. But yeah, some people say, Langford were avoided by way greater fighters than Gennady Golovkin was. But some people use the Golovkin was avoided argument. I always counter by saying, well, Langford were avoided, but look at his career he built. So, you can always find fights. Burley were avoided, but look at career he built. Homer Williams were. So, yeah, ultimately, like you pointed out, Random, it goes on career they built ultimately. That's what I go on generally.
Yeah, because Langford was being avoided by the welterweights. After Joe Walcott hurt his hand in 2004, the white welterweights didn't want any of Sam Langford. So he started fighting middleweights. And then when he's barely even a middleweight, he jumps up and he's fighting Joe Jeanette. And then he's fighting Joe Jeanette again and beats him that time on points in Chelsea. And then in Chelsea again, the club books him to fight Jack Johnson. They both accept instantly. And he goes the distance with Johnson. I mean, it's like, so Langford created opportunity, but with his willingness to just like other great fighters, like Jack Johnson himself, took $5,000, I think it was, plus expenses, to Tommy Burns 30 grand in expenses. But then he won the title and capitalized and made a whole ton of money off it. So it's like all these careers have their own texture, but guys who are avoided can still create opportunity. Sometimes you have to give up size or give up purse. And some of these guys, they just dealt with it. They just did what they did. So Langford's a great example of that, where you can have the greatest resume of them all, the toughest career of them all, and also have been the most avoided. Just depends what era you're fighting in and what your opportunities you create. And a lot of these guys did that. So not everyone had De La Hoya level opportunity. Few ever had like Ray Leonard, De La Hoya style opportunities. But that's okay, because we're not just celebrating opportunities. We're celebrating greatness in combat sports, which is like a pretty broad term. And I'm comfortable that everyone we've put in is worthy in their own way.
Yeah, kind of back onto us all. I mean, Scrap and Random, do you think we should say what his next step is?
Yeah, go for it, BL. Tell the people.
Sure. Yeah, if you two guys are okay. Yeah, just to listeners, me, Scrap and Random had a little chat, and one thing we realised is if we went nominations each episode, we'd probably be doing them all next Christmas. So we came to an idea of doing a drop load of adding in most major fighters. But what we've decided is on his next live, we're going to go back to 10 nominations each and the reasons why, which I think, now we've got a lot of main fighters in. Now we've got the core in now. We're adding on to that, and also like me and guys discussed. You know, as we get to more fringe fighters who we may think may be in or should be in, shouldn't be in, you know, the nomination process is better for that because we can discuss it, you know, back and forth on any fighters we come across who we're a bit unsure of. If Scrap's unsure of one of mine, or I'm unsure of one of Random's, or he's unsure of one of mine, whatever, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to announce that listeners will be going back on this next one to nominations. So yeah, I think, guys, to be fair to all three of us, I think we've made a great start. And I think it will be one of the toughest Hall of Fames. And there's already fighters in there who haven't been given the credit yet of joining the IBHOF, for example. So, yeah, I think we're doing a great job so far.
Yeah, and we mentioned that.
I second that for sure. And I think
third that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say with the 10 men, I think it gives an opportunity for the listeners to get a little more educated on those 10 men. And we can really dissect as to why that is the case, because you're going to run into a situation where you may have to defend your choice, because as you start to get deeper into some fighters that we'll start selecting, they're going to be not as known to some of the listeners as we may know them. So we may have to justify as to why we feel they should be in there, because you're going to get a lot of complaints. Why this guy's not in, or who is this guy? Because they're not familiar.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
This is an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's a good point. We'll have to make the sale.
Yeah, perfect point, Scrap. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And you mentioned BL, no heavyweights, but look at all these amazing greats at heavyweight that we already put in: Sam Langford, Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, Harry Wills, Sam McVeigh, Peter Jackson, Ezard Charles, Rocky Marciano, Joe Jeanette, Bob Fitzsimmons.
And now you've added Lennox the Lion to that list. He's worthy on that list as well. So, yeah, there's another heavyweight there you've nominated tonight, Random Lennox.
Yeah, and see, I'm not sure about the original George Godfrey. He was an important fighter, and he was a good fighter with a good resume, but he's one of those guys where I'd actually have to debate myself whether or not to nominate him.
Yeah, I'd be hesitant because, I'd be hesitant. You see, I'm always struck because, say a fighter like Scrap mentioned earlier, really, really tough and capable lightweight fighter, Steve Crosby. You know, he was a fantastic fighter of his time. In some years, he was one of the best lightweights in the world behind the champion. But I wouldn't essentially just throw him in the Hall of Fame. So I can respect a fighter from his time and think, wow, he was a fantastic fighter, but I wouldn't put him in. I'm not saying I won't put Crosby in, but those situations may come up where there's a fantastic fighter and I think, oh, he's a fantastic fighter, yeah, but I wouldn't put him in the Hall. So, that's where the fun will begin for us guys and for listeners, because, it's going to be, like Strap rightly said, you know, we're going to be naming some guys who some listeners may think, who's that? What did he do? And like Strap quite well said, you know, now we've got a lot of main ones in, because to our listeners, when we throw a name out like Ezard Charles, people know who he is. You know, we don't really have to sell why he's in the Hall. And I thought it was a great point Scrap made when he said, you know, now we're going to be going sometimes to fringe what he was kind of alluding to, and we may have to explain why for listeners, you know, because it's all a learning experience. We all learn together, you know, us three and listeners alike. So, yeah, I think it's a great point he made there, Scrap. Well, good point.
Yeah, I'm interested. I think I'm going to nominate Willie Lewis just so we can have the debate. Because there's some guys, because he's a great fighter. I mean, I consider him one of the, you know, a great fighter in his era, but, you know, I'm not sure. So, certain guys, I guess I'd have to look close.
Between us guys, the real debate, and please don't laugh, the real debate is going to come when I nominate my heavyweight spanner in the works.
Gunboat.
My Ed Smith, it's coming. The debate of all time.
Hey, I think I'll say this: Gunboat beat Sam Langford when Sam Langford was among his best years, his many best seasons. But also, he was important enough that Dempsey was saying that Greb had to beat Gunboat to get a title shot, and then years later, and then he did, and then of course it didn't happen because, you know, a lot of people just didn't want to fight Greb. But
Yeah, I'm playing on Gumbo. I won't put him in the hall, but I just like to name drop him here or there.
I think
Just keep him
I think
fresh.
you can make an argument, but it might not be the strongest one. But he's
Yeah, he had over
heavily
25
respected in my
Hall
book.
of Famers, fought a who's who. Got
That's what I
DQ'd
mean.
against
Like,
Carpentier. That hurt him a bit, but
yeah, it's a tough one, but he was an important win for people to have, if that counts for anything.
yeah, he was one of the top
It
10
meant
heavyweights
something.
of his time, from like 1912 to like 1917. He were a heavyweight in the mix, just not as good as the champions. Not as good as Johnson.
Right.
Willard.
There was some real beasts around, like Fred Fulton and some other guys around that were also very, very, very dangerous in their own right.
Yeah, Willard's more of a tough match. Gumbo's more of a tough fight for Willard than it would have been for Johnson and Wills and Dempsey. But certainly one of legitimate heavyweight contenders of his time, but not someone I'd put in the hall. But
he wouldn't be
like
one of the
Scrap
first
said, there's
guys.
going to be some of these fighters who crop up.
Right. And again, I'd say it a lot, but it's like depends how deep we go. Because like there are guys who haven't come up yet that are definitely definites. We just haven't happened to have nominated them yet. But they're all, there's also a whole slew. But I guess every time you ease the requirements, it open because of the length of boxing history, just in the gloved era, it opens up dozens of guys. Even a slight slip in the standards opens up dozens of new people. So it all depends how deep we go. But I'm confident that our next, if we do 10 each, they'll all be very strong candidates indeed.
Yeah, and as always, we will give the information out for the listeners, because as we've said before, me and Scrap, I hope the Scrap don't mind me saying, me and Scrap have both said, well, not said but agreed when we've spoke that, we shouting these guys' name out. Okay, to me, it's not just about coming on and doing videos. One of my passions is trying to help keep these guys' names alive, help these guys get known. Through my channel and through Scrap's channel, many people will have turned to fighters from his channel who they may not have been as familiar with. And similar to mine, Scrap will know more his stories on people who may have been to him saying, wow, I didn't know about. But, for me, I've helped highlight fighters like Greb and Langford. When I came on YouTube in 2014, December, hardly anybody were talking about Greb and Langford, and I were committed to putting contact on them. And later were fighters like Rosenblum and other fighters that now you see the names cropping up everywhere. You see Rosenblum, people really giving him good shout outs. So for me, it's never been an ego thing. I'm just happy to be part, with Scrap and with yourself, Random, and with all the other people who talk boxing history. I'm just happy to play my part in trying to shout these guys out, highlight these guys, get these guys more known. Many of them for who great fighters they are, and if they're not worthy to be in the hall, highlighting what great contenders they were. So yeah, that's all I'd like to say. That's my passion. Just trying to spread names, help people understand fighters a bit better. And I know Scrap's passionate about that as well. It's all a growing game. It's all a learning game. I've had people who are 17-year-old come to me and say, oh, wow, I didn't know about this guy, but I'm going to study. And then they're studying him. And then I'll see him on other channels and they're spouting loads of facts about that fighter that they told me they didn't know about until they'd seen my video. So, it's one of great things we can pass on to boxing fans, knowledge. And like Bruce Gass said, big shout out to Bruce Gass, who were in chat as well. Like he said, he always learns when he comes here. And, that's one of the important things. I'm sure Scrap will agree. It's a learning game. We all grow together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've done a phenomenal job. And keeping the names alive of these fighters, going way, way back and into names that most people wouldn't even know existed. And that's very, very important. And it makes me very proud to actually be a part of a conversation, because I've been studying boxing a very, very long time. I've met a lot of fighters. I met a lot of men in their 80s when I was about 7. So they were fighting in the teens and the 20s, when they were young in their prime. But all the information that I've gotten a lot of that information just by talking to a lot of those guys that were actually there. And a lot of times one guy didn't know the other guy, and I would hear similar stories. And of course, the old newspapers back then, you had to go to the library and you can borrow some of the papers that they had, and just a lot of deep diving. But just getting information from UBL, from your studying, it's a real treat. It saves me a lot of time, of course, and random.
Yeah, likewise for you, Scrap. I mean, your videos are so in depth. I will say this as well. I'll give you. I know, Scrapbook. I don't want you, go and shy or anything. But I will say it's been great to have a real boxing brother. I had the great pleasure of meeting Random when he started coming to my channel, and everything's gone from strength to strength. But it was great to have a fellow boxing brother doing the historical content that I was kind of different to my kind of content. We have his own different styles, but it was great to have a counter to me who were putting out all this great information, experience, and knowledge as well, which kind of backed what I were doing with the more statistics and the stories from my side. So yeah, it's been and I've learned so much as well, because like I always tell people, and I'm sure Scrap will agree with me again, and Random as someone who's deep diving onto early era, boxing is a complete learning game. There's always something to learn. There's always a fight you don't know. Even sometimes I'll see a fighter's name on a record and I'm not too familiar with him, so I'll spend some time and do a bit of a deep dive. And some fighters over the last 15, 20 years, who I've come across like that, like Chester Goodwin, and all these other fighters, some fantastic contenders, Cuban Bobby Brown, Joe Knight, all these other fighters who virtually no one speaks of except Scrap, and that's the benefit, through channels, like ours. Hopefully someone out there. I always had a line: if one person watches one of my videos and learns about one fighter he didn't know about the day before, then my job's done. That is my passion, and I know Scrap is very passionate about that as well, spreading word on fighters. So I think our Hall of Fame will be a great Hall of Fame when it's built, and I'm sure we'll have some friendly disagreements later, but we have the 3 votes. Fighters will get in or they won't get in. But I think by the end of the project we've undertaken, I think we'll have a fantastic Hall of Fame, and hopefully one that matches and is as strong as any other out there. And it's the first time I think any channels have collabed to create a Hall of Fame in this way. So we're also breaking a mold, so that's great as well.
Yeah, it's very gratifying intellectually and emotionally, but intellectually, it's like extremely gratifying, and it's just giving me more fuel to learn. Like some of these guys I wasn't familiar with, I just heard the name come up a lot, but I was studying yours and Scrap's videos, BL, before I was researching the sport. Like you guys were literally my entry point to when the pandemic hit, and I was gardening and listening to videos and stuff and trying to work what work I could get. So like that was my entryway into like the research. Was studying your guys' videos based on all your research. So like I'm grateful, and it's just a thrill to be involved in this, and it's just more motivation to learn more and more. Because someone like Jack Dillon, he wasn't an attention-seeking kind of guy, but he had a huge career. But he wasn't like a self-promoter the way certain other guys were. So like other people were better in that regard, or motivated differently. So like, yeah, some guys you have to dig a little bit to realize how great they were. And that's what's happening for me, because it's easy to go on YouTube and see the modern guys. People have done wonderful documentaries on them. We're in a documentary golden age, really, in spite of all the misinformation. It's like, for sports especially, it's just fantastic. YouTube's wonderful, but some of the guys, there's just not much out there. But although there is a really nice Tony Canzoneri tribute, just some highlights of his technique on YouTube. Go watch that if you've never seen that, folks. Some badass stuff.
Yeah, and to all listeners, I'm on a bit of a break at the moment until start of January. But next year, career videos galore coming, and there's going to be other fighters I've never done videos on, fighters I respect, tough contenders like Chico Veja, and many others who are going to be coming videos for first time on my channel. And there's some other fighters I've spoke about, but I've never done career videos on, like Lockport, Jimmy Duffy, as well as the main ones. Over the last 2 days, I've remodified and rebuilt career files on Pacquiao, Robinson, and Algainer. I'm still working in background. Oh, I did Joe Frazier as well. And I've also done Mike McTeague. So I'm still working in background, rebuilding files and creating new files for new fighters I'm adding to my top 1,000 ratings for the first time. So yeah, into next year, lots more content, lots more videos, and many new fighters I've not done videos on before. So I'm really excited to do some of those videos. Someone like Scrapbook will know Chico Veja, very well-traveled contender, fought a lot of good fighters.
If I may briefly, hey, Scrapbook, I see you there under guests, but it's not letting me bring you into the studio. Can you or into the chat? Can you leave and come back? Like, I see him there, but it only says edit name, kick from studio, ban from studio, and I don't want any of those options. I want to let him in. Go out and come back in, Scrap. It should sort itself out. Okay, he did. He heard me. But yeah, these are all like, and I was thinking when I was making my list, I was going to repopulate it after I took out the overlaps, because I think we all had Willie Pep in there.
Yeah,
it was either Pep or Sadler. We all had them, and some of these guys, we're dealing with so many different greats. We forget who's already come up. It's already a long list before we even started today's show. When I was typing it out, I was like, "That's a lot of people to start." Like for 2 shows. And now I'm gonna have to do the new list. I'm gonna have to alphabetize the new inductees, but we got a hefty list. Okay, Scrap's back. Welcome back, Scrapbook. Oh, you might be muted, but you're here. Yeah, so anyway, it's been great. I think this is a good point to call it. Thanks to everyone for the chat and for the participation. And if you have ideas for people, please share them as some more. Thanks for the
Yeah, could I just say, Random, thank you. For hosting all live events you have hosted. We really appreciate it. And you're a welcome member of our panel. And to Scrapbook, I'd just like to say thank you for all the service you've done to all the boxing fans with all your very deep content on your channel. Big shout out and thank you to both of you, gents. And I shall definitely catch you on the next one. And thank you to the listeners as well. We all learn and grow together, and long may it continue.
Oh, thank you so
absolutely.
much.
It's been really great already, and I'm excited to now come up with my 10. We'll coordinate in the back so that we don't have any overlaps. So we'll have a class of 30. That way we won't have to do 100-part series.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. I've been standing outside to have a good signal. I am now officially freezing cold. Took a while.
Yeah. Do not freeze yourself, buddy. Yeah.
I'm pretty resilient, but I've been out here 100 minutes now, or 90 minutes. So yeah, I'm getting cold. I'm not afraid to admit. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back, and I'll do up the graphics, the updated graphics, and maybe after this next show, we should do a supplemental sort of a recap, because there's been so many. Although we have been recapping. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it's been real. Take it easy, and thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, guys.